Well, on the Undistracted podcast, it is an absolute pleasure to have joining us Melissa Doyle, Naima Brown, authors of How to Age Against the Machine. Ladies, thank you so much for your time today.
Hi, Laura.
Thank you.
This is a really important conversation I think you guys are bringing to the table. When did the conversation around aging and having to discuss it become a conversation for both of you that you wanted to have together?
Aging has many negative connotations for people. And there is a perception of that your looks are different, your body is different, you change the way you go about your place in the world. And we felt first and foremost that was the wrong messaging. We shouldn't be looking at aging as a negative because it's a positive. Every day you're on this world is a bonus. You're aging from the day you're born. And we just had that challenging conversation of why are there perceptions placed upon older people that maybe they're not as quick and clever in the workplace, or maybe they can't do certain things, or maybe they can't bring certain things to the table. And then there's also the perception that we have on ourselves that maybe I am getting older, maybe I am different. And Naima and I kept coming back to that premise of, yes, you're different, but different isn't a bad thing. Different isn't necessarily negative. I think of the wisdom that I've gained in my, 30 plus years as a journalist. I'd like to think that I'm a better journalist now than I was 20 years ago. And I think we need to recognize and respect the wisdom and the learnings that come with getting older. And maybe in our society, we just haven't enough.
I'm glad you brought that up because I really wanted to touch on that part of this conversation that I think points to people's feeling sometimes that with age comes a sense of irrelevance or exclusion, that maybe you're not going to be honoured and respected, but you're kind of just going to be made invisible. There's an underlying fear in that. How do you guys address the way to overcome the fear of aging, not just the practical realities, but the kind of scary side of getting older that some people feel?
We felt that it went both ways because it's all, yes, of course, there's a lot of people that feel that, but then you don't want to let that happen. It's also, I think, the onus on us as we get older to stay informed. We have we've interviewed a life coach in there that says, if your circumstances have changed, so say, for example, a generalization, but a woman may spend her 20s like I did in, working on her career. Then she raises children and keeps working. And for many women, their purpose in life is defined by a lot of those exterior factors, whether it be raising a family, whether it be, a career. And sometimes she may get to a point where that then changes. How do we treat ourselves as a project and move forward and say, what do I still have to offer? What makes me still relevant and visible? And what is my purpose in life going forward? And we come back to the term purpose and meaning a lot because sometimes that has to be renegotiated. It maybe goes in a different direction, but we need it. Everyone needs a reason to get out of bed every day. And so sometimes you actually have to work at finding what that is. And as you get older, it just might be different than it was when you were younger, but it's no less value. So yeah, we don't want to fear aging. We shouldn't fear aging. We should embrace all the wonderful qualities that come with it. We want this book to be a celebration of aging just as much as a checklist and a Q&A and answers to all those burning questions that you have. Celebrate it. Let's own it. I think it's remarkable. I don't think we shout that from the rooftops nearly enough.
It certainly is a celebration. You both have done that so well. So definite kudos for doing that. And of course, in the title, you're wanting to age against the machine. So how would you define what the machine's view of aging is?
The machine for us, and this is something that kind of continuously came into focus in new ways, but the machine for us is anyone, anything, any institution, any brand, right, that's telling you how you're doing it is wrong. And that you must do it this way, and aging must look like this. And so anytime you just feel that, coming up against that conflict, up against that wall of going, but this isn't me, this isn't the pathway that I want to take. I have so much more to offer still. My relevance is only getting stronger. That's the machine. And that's where, Mel and I often talk about, I'm certainly not immune to those moments where you look in the mirror and the external reality doesn't face the internal reality, where, this or that might want to get plucked or dyed or altered or interfered with. And by all means, no judgment from us. Again, anyone who's judging you, that's the machine. But we really want to shift our focus. If we can shift that rage about new crinkles and new gray hairs into the wage gap, into the lack of superannuation that women retire, into these the bigger, what we'd like to call the age cage, then that's when I think we can really affect some real change.
And I like that I so respect that you guys have taken that approach, because when you read the book, one thing that I noticed was this isn't like a beauty and fashion handbook for getting older. This is about the big stuff of life. How do you process grief and deal with the reality of mortality? How do you talk about some of those big things like the wage gap and all of that? It's not a superficial picture of staying young. It's actually about the evolution of life as we get older and changes in identity as well.
Yeah, we felt, and they were often conversations that we don't have until you're faced with them. You know, suddenly retirement is looming over the hill, and it's not something that research has shown us that people plan for quite as much as they might plan for when they're going to start a family, or when they're going to buy a house, or what their next position might be on the career ladder. That retirement's one of those things that creeps up. For many women, the decision is not theirs, and that's what makes us quite angry. But for those that do have the power over the timing of it, it isn't something that you go through the checklist. Grief and end of life planning. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want to talk about it because it's sad. It's one of those things, it's a reminder that we're not going to be here forever, but we need to talk about them. And a lot of these topics that we wrote about, we were living. Naima, gosh, had me on the phone in tears so many days as we were writing the relationships chapter, because my eldest son left home at the time, and I wrote about empty nesters. And you know, that was something I hadn't thought about. I spent 20 years getting him ready to fly the nest, and then I totally forgot to get myself ready. So we just felt that there was a lot of areas that we don't actually think about far enough in advance, that, you know, we forget that older women start out as younger women, and we've got to tackle these things a little earlier.
Yeah, we've got to use a preparation window. And I know that that's one of the difficulties in, I think, getting older, in the way that the order of learning, right? So when you reach your 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, there's a beautiful freedom and wisdom that can come with that. But then I think there's younger women who wish they could get those epiphanies sooner. Is there a way we can arrive, I suppose, at some of these points of realization without necessarily having to wait until we're so much older?
Yes. I mean, as Mel just said, you know, another kind of key idea that really anchored us in our writing and in creating this book was that older women start out as young girls. And if I could throw out, you know, one more saying into the conversation that I'm loving seeing much more frequently, is that you're not too old and it's not too late, right? So yes, we would like to see this book in the hands of, you know, your 22-year-old who's maybe stepping into her first, you know, real job, and she's going to think long and hard about her savings plan, about, as Mel said, put as much thought into preparing for her, you know, later decades as she might into when does she perhaps, if she wants to, have children or marry, or, you know, those bigger milestones that happen earlier in our life. And I really do think it's important to say, though, to anyone listening, that it really isn't too late. You know, so many women find themselves in their 50s, post a life where they were doing all of the things that they'd been told they should be, unpaid labor, you know, the primary carers in their homes, for their children, or perhaps even for their elders. That leaves them with a real financial struggle sometimes. It doesn't take much, maybe one big health emergency. And then, you know, as one of the women we interviewed for the book did, you may find yourself experiencing homelessness. Yeah. And the woman that we did talk to, Sam, who did spend a period of time living in her car as a woman in her 50s, she has bounced back and she is doing so much better now. And I think that part of her story is really important to emphasize. As soon as you start to demystify these things and have those conversations with each other, I do think that there's a way to find ourselves back to dignity, to stability in our older years.
And Laura, for any of younger listeners on this, think of it as power. You have the power over your future at any moment, at the earliest possible opportunity. You know, whether or not a woman has a safe, stable, supported older life is directly related to whether she had a safe, stable, supported younger life. And so, as Nai said, there are actions that we can take. It's never too early. And I think it's just, we found so many of these things we've talked about in the book, we just hadn't thought of until suddenly they were there. So I'd love it if something that comes out of all of this is we do a little bit more pre-planning. We do a little bit more thought into the logistics of getting older. Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? What am I going to need around me? Who am I going to need around me? What can I do to care for my parents? You know, what position are they in? Just some of those questions maybe think of a little earlier than we may have traditionally.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that there's a book like this that's going to be empowering people to have those conversations, because I know for those that are at the younger end of the spectrum, one of the things that's so important is having examples of women in midlife and beyond living well, living with that sort of power mindset, living in a way that says what's down the line can be better. You can get stronger as you get older, that it doesn't have to go downhill, because it can be so scary to think all that's in front of us is this inevitable kind of swamp of uncertainty and vulnerability, right?
Absolutely. I think that, again, it's sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? And there's a reason why, as you mentioned earlier, we include a chapter on grief. There are inevitable moments of grieving that come with aging. And it's not just the grief of losing loved ones. It's the grief of, maybe coming to terms that we can't drive anymore. Maybe it's coming to terms that, our eyesight isn't what it used to be. There are moments of loss, moments of recalibrating along that timeline. But as we always come back to, the alternative is to not be here anymore, right? So it's about strengthening that muscle so that when we come up against those moments, which we will, certainly we don't want to portray aging as this kind of, running through the fields with rainbows and puppy dogs, although maybe that can happen some days. But it's about going, okay, so when I do come up against a moment where, it's the hard stuff of living a long life, I have some tools in my toolbox. And we hope this book is one of them. I mean, I'm negotiating some of, these things in terms of what's happening with my parents as they age as we speak. And the amount of times that I've personally reached for my very dog-eared and post-it noted copy of our book to refer back to the wisdom of the experts that we've interviewed is countless. So that's what we hope that it can be an offering of.
And there's a conversation about self-confidence in this all as well, which I think you guys do a great job of looking at through the lens of friendship, through the lens of intimacy, work, everything. When it comes to our self-confidence, what would your words of wisdom be? Either of you can jump in on this, on how to retain confidence as we get older, because it can be knocked around so much.
And maybe it needs to be renegotiated. I feel like all of us through our entire life, there's peaks and troughs, isn't there? There's moments where I don't know about you, but I'm, fist pump in the air going, yay, I've got this. And other moments when you doubt yourself or your relevancy or your level of knowledge or your ability to contribute. I think that's a normal thing. So let's acknowledge it. Let's talk about it. Let's normalize it. And maybe there comes a time as one gets a little bit older to redefine it. But I think that's where the support networks we have around us are so important. We talk a lot about relationships and friendships in this, and sometimes friendships are different than they were when they were younger. Hopefully you're still lucky to have the people in your life that you've had throughout. Sometimes someone might move or circumstances change or you lose those people, but never recognize how much we all need one another. I come back to the fact that as a pair of journalists, we believe in storytelling. We believe in sharing so much. And I think women are really good at that. I don't know about you, but I feel like I can sit down at a dinner party, meet someone for the first time, and by the time dessert comes around, I know everything about them. Whereas my husband kind of is like, what were their names again? And I can give you their family history. But that is so important. And that is how we need to stay connected to one another, and then use that to remind each other of our values and what we still have to give. There's so many times I ring Naima, I'm feeling wobbly and can I do this? Am I okay? Should I be doing this? And vice versa. She's the first one to be my cheerleader. And I think we all need those people in our lives.
Absolutely. And I think too, there's a, what's the word? Like an evolution of how we see ourselves from a feminine point of view. For some women, that connection to femininity, it really matters, but it changes as you get older. You guys are very practical in talking about the physical changes that our bodies experience, moving through premenopause, menopause, and everything afterwards. What do you think that changing idea of who we are as women does to our sense of ourselves as we age and as our bodies change?
I think, one thing we're always really mindful to come back to is that there is no one size fits all approach. We spoke to, an older auntie in South Korea who, which is one of the plastic surgery capitals of the world, where her approach to aging would be very much in that category of anti-aging, right? So every possible intervention, every possible surgery that she could afford, she would avail herself to, all the way to the other end of the spectrum. We spoke to a lovely elder, Deirdre in New Zealand, who is a Maori leader in her community, and she wears the traditional moko on her face, and she couldn't fathom getting involved in the natural progression of what her face and the story that her face is telling, right? So those two ends of the spectrum. And I think the middle path that Mel and I discovered, which we borrow from a really incredible psychologist that we interviewed, Dr. Julie Malone, is that it's all about getting really quiet within yourself for a moment and asking yourself what your expectations really are, and are they realistic? So, before you take any measures, whether it's spending a little bit more money than you might have on some fancy cream, all the way to the other end of the intervention spectrum, what are you actually expecting this thing to do? And if you're expecting it to have a really big impact on your emotional well-being, Dr. Julie Malone taught us that you might find yourself disappointed. So, getting, I think, connected to your intention around all of the external aesthetic things is like Mel said, for her, for myself as well, those things come down to a sort of self-respect, to an enjoyment of, of fashion and of beauty and of this landscape. But, there has to be more purpose and meaning, as we always say, to come alongside that if we're not going to end up disappointed.
It's all about no judgment. That's the thing that upsets us the most when you see commentary around how people choose to age or what they choose or choose not to do to themselves aesthetically. It's no one else's business, I think. And also women deserve the right to change their mind. It might be something that you never want to do or embark on, but then there could be an illness, there could be surgery, there could be a breakup, there could be a million reasons where suddenly you wake up one day and you feel quite different about how you felt about it before. And that might mean that you now want to do something, or you no longer do or want to do anything. So I think it's about the power to choose and respecting other women for the choices that they make and supporting them. As I said, there's no right way to age. There's no right way to deal with some of the things that will keep one person awake at night. Are probably entirely different to what will keep another woman awake at night.
Yeah. And Mel, you point out a really great distinction, I think, between being of an anti-aging mindset versus approaching all of these decisions you make around whether it's physical appearance and anything else around health. How did you arrive at that decision of looking at health as opposed to anti-aging?
First of all, we really hate the term anti-aging because you can't anti-age. Like, what is anti-aging? It's going against the natural course of life. And as we keep coming back to, aging is to be celebrated. Aging is another day, another week, another month on this earth. A 4-year-old is older than a 3-year-old. Yeah, I wake up in the morning and I don't spring out of bed anymore. I have to sit there for a moment because my knees are a little bit creaky. But big deal, I can still get up and walk to the bathroom to clean my teeth. And I still have teeth to clean. I think it's about how you look at the world. And I'd like to think that I've always been that glass half full person. But even more so as I get older, I still have my family around me. I'm so lucky. I still have my parents. I still have my friends. I look around and I am so rich with all of those things. And that's one of the other things that Naima and I came back to writing this is we are very privileged. We are both educated white women in one of the richest countries on this earth. We're both able-bodied. We're in stable relationships. We can pay the bills. We're so lucky. And that's what makes us even more determined to use this platform that we have to advocate on behalf of women living in countries around the world where their value was tied to having babies or working in a field. And once those elements have gone, their value has decreased, if not vanished. How do we as women in these privileged positions fight on their behalf? They're the women I worry about. That's going to cause me more wrinkles and anguish than, just getting older. And I think, as I said earlier, save our rage for those things that matter. There are so many women around the world that are just not aging They don't have a choice over their health. They don't have a choice over their circumstances when they can retire. They probably don't even have a choice whether they're allowed to have a job or not, or they can hold on to it. So, that's the stuff that really I think is important.
It's such a gift that you guys are having this conversation. Yes, absolutely fist pump for that. Our time, though, is coming to an end. Nai, is there any final thoughts you want to bring to the table around the gift and, yes, the conversation that this book is going to be having with the many women, and I hope some guys too, that read it?
Oh, look, I would just say read the book and then spark those hard conversations. Just be the one to start them. Whether it's with your own parents, whether it's with your girlfriends, your sister, your daughter, just be the one to take that big deep breath and jump in, because chances are that other person does want to talk about these things. And there's a big process of destigmatization, demystification, some big words, but it's big work. So I would just say get to it.
Guys, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you both being on the podcast.
Thanks, Laura.
Our pleasure. Thank you.